and good afternoon. My name is Kenya Lambert, and I serve as the Vice President of Development for the Schreiber Center on Poverty Law. Welcome to our post-election conversation with David Axelrod and Audra Wilson. For those of you who are new to the Schreiber Center, we are a nonprofit organization leading the fight for economic and racial justice for people experiencing poverty. And we lead this fight by using litigation, shaping policy, connecting and training advocates across the country. And we believe in a future free from poverty and racism, and a future where everyone has equal power under the law. So today we have a very special treat. And before we get started, I have several housekeeping items to share with you today. As mentioned earlier, we are recording today's webinar, and we are also streaming live on Facebook through Schreiber Center's Facebook page. Also, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions using our Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen, as you can see on the PowerPoint slide. So feel free to insert your questions because we will devote a good amount of time for Q&A. Now, as mentioned, we're expecting over 500 participants, so we will not have an opportunity to answer all questions, but we will do our best to get through quite a few. So let's get started. As mentioned, we have a special treat today. We're hearing both from Audra Wilson and David Axelrod on this year's election results and also the potential impact that it will have on people in poverty. For those of you who are new to David, he is the former senior advisor to President Barack Obama. Currently, David is the senior political commentator for CNN. David is also the director of the University of Chicago Institute on Politics, and he's the host of the Axe Files podcast. And if you have not attended our galas, you would not know that David was also a past recipient of the Sargent Schreiber Equal Justice Award. Audra Wilson is our new president and CEO of the Schreiber Center, and also she is alumnus of this organization. She actually started her career at the Schreiber Center. And for over 20 years, Audra has been a champion for justice. More recently, Audra was the executive director of the League of Women Voters of Illinois. And prior to that, she served as the chief of staff for Congresswoman Robin Kelly. David and Audra worked together when she served as the deputy press and policy director for then State Senator Barack Obama's US Senate campaign. So once again, I must say it is a treat to hear both of you in conversation today. So Audra and David, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Kenya. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time to join us for this very special conversation. And David, thank you for joining us today and your ongoing support of the Schreiber Center. I'm especially happy to be here with you. As Kenya just mentioned, we've had the opportunity to work together to support our friend, our former Illinois State Senator and turned President of the United States, Barack Obama. And during that time together, I learned so much from you and our colleagues, and I'm so honored to have had the opportunity to sit in such rarefied air. So thank you for that.
Well, Audra, let me just say that you were the deputy policy director, and you produced such great policy for Senator Obama that he became president of the United States. So that's quite a distinction. But no, you were great. You were great then, and the Schreiber Center is in great hands now. So I'm really pleased to be here.
I really appreciate that, David. So here we are. There are simply not enough adjectives to describe 2020. Right? We are in the middle of a global pandemic. We are fighting a virus that is not yet ready to relent. We've seen an egregious disregard for Black bodies, exacerbated by the murder of George Floyd, which sparked a summer full of protests. And all of this has been in the midst of one of the most contentious elections in modern history, with a president who's thought nothing of bullying, ridiculing, or intimidating, constructively squelching dissent or disagreement, and perhaps worse, exploiting America's deepest fears and prejudices to his political advantage. But this is also a very exciting and historic time with a series of firsts. Many may not realize that Kamala Harris was not the first Black woman to run for VP. That was actually a woman named Charlotta Bass who ran for VP in 1952 as a Progressive Party candidate. But she is the first woman, the first South Asian woman, and the first Black woman to hold the second highest position in the land, which is extraordinarily exciting. And the Biden cabinet promises to be the most diverse cabinet ever in history, with so many women and people of color who are being appointed to key positions. So as we're coming to the end of this very tumultuous year, I'm just curious about your reflections about these past several months and where we are as a country. So just tell me, how are you feeling?
Well, I'm feeling like I'm ready for 2020 to be over. This year has been a really challenging year for the country. I'm obviously relieved that Joe Biden won the election. I think a lot of people should properly focus on the fact that Donald Trump got 74 million votes, and that, if you focus on how our system actually works, Biden won by the margin of about 43,000 votes in 3 states, Georgia, Arizona, and Wisconsin, which if they had gone the other way and all of them were well within a point, then this race would have been tied. It would have gone to the House of Representatives. Under the rules of the House, they vote by delegations. And Donald Trump, because there are more Republican delegations, even if there aren't members, he would have been reelected president of the United States. And underneath, Democrats had a very bad day. Didn't take the Senate, thought they were going to take 6 legislatures, didn't take any, lost 3 more. The House, where Democrats thought they were going to gain maybe a dozen seats, are going to end up losing almost as many. And so these are sobering notes about the election. So my feeling is one of great relief, but also of probing to try and understand why the results turned out the way they did, and what instructions does that give us about what we need to do in the future to expand the ability to command a majority in a way that allows you to move policy forward.
So thank you for that, because I want to go back to a point that you made at the very beginning. We know this path ahead is not direct. It's not going to be easy. But let's talk about the fact that over 70 million people voted for President Trump. And not just despite his very abhorrent behavior, but sometimes because of it. So what is it, in your estimation, that has remained so appealing to so many American voters about a president who's been so unconventional at best as this one? And secondarily, what do you think that President-elect Biden needs to do to more meaningfully engage with this huge swath of the American electorate that voted in some ways more enthusiastically for President Trump than they did in 2016?
Yeah, in fact, he got, more than 10 million additional votes than he did 4 years ago, despite everything that we've seen. Look, we're a deeply divided country. The metropolitan areas have become much more democratic. The suburbs were the biggest shift in this election and have become more of a democratic stronghold, tentative democratic stronghold. That's where Biden found the additional votes to win. But there's still these wide swaths of the country. 80% of the counties in the country voted for Donald Trump, small towns, rural areas. And I think, they are people who feel alienated. He is a master of mining aggrievement, mining resentment, mining a sense of loss. These are places more often, most of the wealth is concentrated in those counties that Biden won. Most of the economic dislocation that we've seen in a changing economy have been visited on the communities that went for Trump. He did what demagogues do, and he identified as enemies, immigrants, minorities, also trade, and a sense, and he mined a sense on the part of these voters that the system was rigged against them. Beyond that, I think there was a sense that we, in our rarefied world, tend to moralize to them, but we don't really identify with their concerns and their struggles. And let's be honest, I mean, the issue of race is a big one, and Trump was willing to touch that third rail again and again and again to amplify his sense that it's us versus them. And that may have had a galvanizing effect. It had a galvanizing effect on both sides. But Audra, you raised the important question: what does that mean? What does that mean for Democrats who want to build governing majorities? And I'm obsessed by this question, particularly since this election. How do we find how do we speak to common concerns? How do we signify a sense of understanding? I'll give you some examples. Climate change. I am as fervent a supporter of climate action as anyone. I do think it's an existential challenge. There are plenty of folks, though, who make their living in old energy industries, who see it as a threat to their jobs and their livelihoods. It's not an effective strategy to tell them that it's their moral duty to sacrifice their jobs and their incomes. It's the responsibility of people who support climate action to understand that this is a problem and make an economic case to these Americans about how they are going to fare in this transition, what we are going to do during this transition to help bring the benefits of a new green economy to them. I think about this virus, Audra, that even on this, where it's so readily apparent that there are sacrifices that we have to make in order to save lives and not keep our public health system from being overwhelmed. But it's a hell of a lot easier for me sitting on a farm in Michigan and not having to go out to do my work, to tell people that you have to shut your business down, you have to give up your paycheck for the greater good. And we need to stand by those people who are making sacrifices. And by the way, as is true with a lot of problems, many of them are in inner cities, and many of them are in rural communities, and small towns. So we really need to put ourselves in other people's shoes, and without sacrificing our principle or our goals or our values, but understanding that this is a big, diverse country and people see things through the lens of their own experience. So one last point on this. The thing that makes it much more complicated is the modern media ecosystem, and that right-wing conservative ecosystem that just pours venom into the debate and conspiracy theories and so on, and it hardens the opposition. And that is there's not an easy answer to that, but that's another barrier that we're going to have to overcome.
No, and you touch on a lot of things that of course it keeps us awake at night too, and the work that we do. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how Schreiber Center is maneuvering in this period of time. But one more thing about just sort of things to come in this political landscape for the president-elect and vice president-elect. What would you say, what's going to be left for them as they're walking into this new Congress next year?
Yes, yeah.
I mean, you still have a lot of holdovers. You talked about the fact that we have not gained a lot of seats, obviously in the House. Georgia is still in the balance. So what exactly is the president-elect about to walk into? And what do you see is going to be important for him to be able to actually be able to maneuver and get things done when you are still going to have a lot of holdovers from this previous administration?
Yeah, someone who worked with Joe Biden for years, I am thrilled for him. I'm obviously relieved for the country. I do feel a little sometimes like he's the dog who caught the car, because there's nothing but challenges around. He's going to have to administer the you know the coronavirus response, including the distribution of vaccines and the economic fallout from it, and face these broader problems that have been festering for a long time that he ran on trying to solve. But he may not have all the tools that he needs, because he's, and this is the tragedy of the outcome of the Senate races, which could turn on Georgia. You could still see two Democrats win in Georgia, Democrats narrowly taking over the Senate. But a lot rests on that, because Joe Biden has some expansive plans on how to reform the economy in ways that will put more equity into it more broadly, for and more opportunity for more people, that will close the inequality gap, that will deal with issues of poverty, make work pay. But some of that rests on the ability to spend money. And one of the things that concerns me is it feels like Senator McConnell has been trying to kick the stimulus for the COVID virus over to the new president, so that once they pass it, he can say, well, we've just spent trillions of dollars, we can't spend any more. Biden has proposed rolling back tax cuts for people over 400,000, the tax cuts that Donald Trump implemented. He's proposed rolling back some of the corporate tax cuts in order to pay for child care tax credits and a range of other things that will help put people back to work, that will make it easier for people who are working, that will ease the pressure on working families and lift people up who need help. But you can see I've seen this movie before. You can see Mitch McConnell, who is a seasonal deficit hawk. Every time there's a Democratic president, he awakes like Rip Van Winkle and says, we can't spend another dime. And so I worry that, Biden will be constrained. There's a lot he can do with his regulatory power through executive orders, but at the end of the day, resources are important, and the ability to get the resources you need is important. And that could be really difficult given the, depending on the outcome of the election in Georgia. And let's be clear, we had 58 votes in Congress when we arrived. We ultimately got up to 60 for a brief time in the Senate, and we still had trouble because there were on some issues because there were Democrats who came from more conservative states, and so even a 50-50 Senate with Kamala Harris breaking ties is not a guarantee of anything. So yeah, I think it's going to be very challenging.
Absolutely. So David, I want to take a moment to address our guests today and talk to them a little bit about the mission of the Schreiber Center. So for those of you who are new to Schreiber, just to give you some background, we are an organization born out of the war on poverty, and our mission is to ensure economic and racial justice for all. And as David has alluded to, combating poverty is going to be especially crucial at this moment. As a direct consequence of the pandemic, in 2020 alone, more than 8 million people have fallen into poverty, and that's 8 million more people have fallen into poverty, and there are millions more who are on the brink. But our dual purpose of achieving economic and racial justice is very deliberate, as racial justice cannot be achieved without economic justice, and economic justice will not go unrealized without racial justice. And we know that racial justice requires stable incomes and jobs, affordable housing, quality healthcare, quality public education, and effective public infrastructure. And so that's why we at Schreiber work with our peers to fight structural racism and advocate for anti-racist and anti-poverty policies and practices. But no place has the impact of structural racism been more obvious than, quite frankly, during the COVID era, with a disproportionate number of Black and brown people dying of the virus. And so many people of color are essential workers, the workforce behind our workforce. These are the people who treat our sick. They clean and disinfect our public buildings. They care for our children. They transport people and goods. And they're also the ones who are the most exposed to the virus on a daily basis. And yet they frequently hold more than one job to make ends meet. They often have no employer-based health insurance. They have no paid sick leave and very few vacation days. So, David, thinking for a moment about our specific mission and our focus right now for 2020, what are your thoughts about how the incoming administration should be approaching curbing poverty?
Yeah, well, first of all, the points you make about the virus are so important because as with almost every crisis we have, they're felt more readily um, in minority communities, in Black communities, um, where we have a compounding effect of generations of problems and neglect and racism. The fact that people of color were so much more subject to health concerns have to do with uh, the lack of healthcare resources in those communities. Long-term health, chronic health problems made African Americans more vulnerable. And then, as you point out, the fact that many people in the community simply didn't have the luxury to stay home and wait the thing out. They were on the front lines. And it's so interesting that we honor those frontline workers, we call them heroes and so on, but we don't do anything to reward their heroism. We don't do anything to it's great to be called an essential worker in a crisis, but the essentiality of your work has to be recognized when we're not in a crisis, and people need to be paid adequately and have and offered the advantages that essential workers deserve and their families deserve. So, that's really important. And there has to be, I mean, I know that President elect appointed an economic team yesterday, and that was very heartening to me because their emphasis was to a person on how do we raise wages, how do we close the inequality gap, how do we deal with structural poverty, which is a multifaceted thing. Some of it is raising wages, and I think one of the early fights that you may see is over a national minimum wage of $15. I expect to see that, but it also goes to other sports. Frankly, childcare support is one of them. Equal educational opportunities and training opportunities are part of it. Healthcare and nutrition. I mean, there needs to be a multifaceted strategy to make sure that people have a fighting chance and that hard work is rewarded and that people can support their families who do work hard and that their children can get the opportunities they need. It's not like we can flick a switch. We need to change a mindset and make fighting poverty a national priority.
So, related to that, and something that you had said earlier about how you're appealing to people and not making moral arguments. When you and I did a prep for this call, and we were just doing some reminiscing when I first started working on Barack's campaign, that was one of the problems that I had as a young attorney, especially as I'm talking about poverty. And I used to be very resentful of the fact that I had to talk about poverty in a more appealing way because I was always trying to appeal to people with this moral argument. It's the right thing to do. It's the moral thing to do. Fortunately, I've grown up a bit, matured a little bit more, and I've been out and about and understand that you have to make some more compelling arguments than just morality. But with respect to poverty, it seems like there's a lot of opportunities to talk about poverty beyond being a moral issue. So talk a little bit about the cost, quite frankly, of our discriminatory policies. I mean, because there's an actual physical cost to us discriminating against or not looking after those who are most in need, sometimes in the tune of trillions of dollars. But can you educate our audience a little bit more about why we need to be thinking about these issues and how it really does impact each and every one of us?
Yeah, it's interesting, the people who complain about government spending and about the cost of taking care of the poor is what they would say. Um, you know, don't absorb the message. And the one I think that is practical and important is that the more that we can help people become self-sufficient, the more that we can help people realize their full potential, the more that we can help people become, full contributors, pay them well, have them invest in the economy, let them, give them the opportunity to build businesses and so on. It makes us stronger, it makes our economy stronger, and it also reduces some of the other costs that, we're not looking to maintain people in poverty. We're looking to lift people out of poverty and give them the opportunity, the skills to become everything that they can be. I mean, that's the pragmatic argument I would make. And I would also make one other argument, Audra, because we're looking at a time where, as I mentioned, the legislatures went backwards and not forwards. We're looking at a time when we're going to have redistricting. We may be facing more Republican legislatures. Illinois is probably insulated from that, but many states are. I know you're a national, not just an Illinois organization. You talk about the virus. When the virus hit, there were communities that were struck particularly hard because they didn't have adequate health care in their communities. Those were inner city communities. They were rural communities. There were communities where the economic impact was harder. Yes, because people had to work and expose themselves to the virus and lose their paychecks because their businesses were closed down, or the businesses where they work were closed down, but also because they're undercapitalized as communities in the first place. There were communities where children suffered more than other children because they didn't have broadband and access to the internet. These are inner city communities and rural communities. So one thing I would say is that we need to build alliances between communities of mutual concerns, even if they don't share all concerns or all experiences. Bringing broadband to rural communities and inner cities is something that we ought to be able to build bipartisan coalitions about, and coalitions that cross geographical lines, and we have to think of it in those terms. And then the other point that I would make about this is I do think that there is a stirring in the corporate community about the cost of poverty and the cost of structural inequality and systemic racism. And you see that more discussion happening more and more. And I think that is an opportunity and one that we ought to encourage. Business is beginning to see that there is a cost to allowing the status quo to stand and a cost to not addressing these problems. And they're starting to invest their funds in changing these policies. And that is something that is to be encouraged and accelerated.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because you started to answer my last question to you before we actually get into some of the questions from our attendees, because we've got some great ones for you. But just to elaborate slightly on that, because we have a lot of folks who are listening today, watching today, who are advocates. They are legal advocates, they're social justice advocates, they're just all sorts of advocates. Many organizations and people individually are wrestling with how best they need to maneuver to be as responsive to the needs of the communities that they serve. So what advice would you give some of our advocates about how they should approach their work? And talking about tapping more into corporations is certainly a great suggestion. But what other things would you suggest that advocates should be thinking about now?
Well, the other one I mentioned earlier is also, which is how do you build within government and political structures, how do you build alliances around discrete issues? I mentioned the issue of broadband, for example, or getting capital into undercapitalized communities and so on. So I would think creatively about building those alliances. But you also in a previous question, you planted the seed that I think is really important, which is how do you educate the larger community on the cost of not acting, on the cost of neglect, on the cost of allowing the status quo to fester, and the gains that can be made by making the proper investments in people and communities to make them self-sufficient, to help them succeed, to help them prosper. I think there is some thought ought to be given to how to deliver that message broadly and build momentum behind the idea of investment, I should say, anti-poverty measures, not merely as what is morally right, but as investments in a better future for everyone.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that, David. So we've got some really great questions that I want to get to. So I'm looking right now. So I see that if you have questions, you can use the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen to submit those. But the first one that I want to ask you says, in what ways does the message of liberals, seen by many as the elites, need to change to attract natural allies to the Democratic Party?
Yeah. Like this goes to my initial point, and it's one that I'm just thinking about all the time. We allow ourselves we live in these virtual reality silos in many ways. We have our own media sort of ecosystem inform us, that affirm our views, but don't necessarily inform us all the time. That's certainly true on the right, but it's true on the left as well. And we think of people outside that silo as alien. And that's destructive to building natural alliances. The fact of the matter is, in rural Michigan, for example, there are people who've been buffeted by changes in the economy. They're struggling with the same absence of access to healthcare and access to capital, access to education. And, even if they're not struggling with the sort of additional burden that systemic racism brings, they're dealing with significant problems. And the fact is that Donald Trump has offered them grievance, but he hasn't offered them solutions. He hasn't offered programs that will help them or their communities grow. So it seems to me that we ought to view these people as common concerns that Democrats can address, and that Republicans simply won't. What we have in Trump, in many ways, not on the issue of trade, but on other issues, we have a lot of the same old policies dressed up in the language of populism. When you look at the way his tax cuts were structured, for example, when you look at the cuts that have been made to programs that are meaningful to people in rural areas as well as urban areas, he's not offered any solutions. So, I just think we have to rethink this and get out of our silos and say, we have a common concern here, and let's do it issue by issue. But also, I expect and I trust that Biden and the team he's put together are going, as they did in the campaign, are going to offer an economic vision in which people can see themselves. In politics, the issue is always, can I see myself in your message? One of the great talents of Barack Obama was that he was able to convey to people that he heard them and he understood them, and that his vision included them. And I think that's so important. If we get into a kind of red-blue, kind of hunkered down posture, the just as a practical political matter, that is going to limit the ability to, as I said earlier, create governing majorities and actually move a progressive agenda forward.
Absolutely. And you make me think a lot about, not only as we talk about, the concerns that people have about elitism, especially liberal elitism, generationally speaking, we also have younger people who, and it's not just younger people, but sometimes they're engaged a bit of that cancel culture, meaning if you're not progressive enough or seen as being progressive enough or moving far enough, then do we disqualify those perspectives from those opinions, which certainly exacerbates the situation if we're trying to reach across the aisle and really meet people where they are in terms of trying to, foster relationships. So.
Yeah, Audra, I work on I work with young people on a campus,
Yes,
and
you
I'm
do.
very, that is a discussion we're having all the time. And I understand the impatience of these young people. They see injustice and they want it addressed. They see problems that have festered forever, and they want to see more progress. But in a big, diverse country that is a democracy, you need to build these coalitions in order to get things done. And if you start off with the perspective that people who don't agree with me on some things are not people I can work with on others, that is a self-defeating philosophy.
Absolutely. So here's another question for you. What gives you both, both of us, I guess, what gives you both confidence that the two sides want to come together and are prepared to see common interests?
Yeah, I mean, look, well, go ahead. You answer first, and then I'll.
No, I'm making you answer this one.
No, I mean,
I will tell
go
you
ahead.
from the House perspective.
Yes.
So I worked for the U.S. House for 5.5 years, and kind of that peeking behind the veil, I would hear. There were the things that you would hear externally about the infighting and the partisanship and all the terrible things that people are hearing externally. Internally, it was interesting because we found that there was a lot more willingness to have discussions, to converse, to at least consider. So I don't want to say it was as contentious as people would think it was externally. The sad part about that, though, is the end of the day, even for those who are willing to listen and to have conversations, they were feeling some pressure by the current administration to perhaps not think necessarily in the best interest of all the constituents that they serve, but to think about their own political livelihood. Because, I mean, imagine here you are, if you step away from the party or you step outside of the box, that you're being threatened to be primaried. So,
yeah.
You're being.
No, that's you're putting your finger on the problem. The incentives are in the wrong place in our political system, and it is more profitable politically to weaponize our differences than try and bridge them. And somehow we've got to change the incentives in our political system where you're rewarded for actually getting things done and not for shaking your fist across a jagged divide. And it's difficult because of the way our primary systems work. But I don't want to put it all on the politicians, because ultimately it's what we demand. I mean, voters have the final say. And if people who want cooperation and want representation that sees our common humanity and is willing to work with people on whatever they can, even if they can't work with them on others, or even if they have major disagreements on others, if we got to demand that. I mean, we've got to stand up for people who are willing to do that and who are right now being buffeted by forces that see their interest in fomenting division. And by the way, that goes to the media environment as well. I think it's more so on the right than the left. But look at what's going on in this election itself. You've got very conservative Republicans who are now being vilified, and their political careers are being threatened simply for doing their job. There was, a petition 12 Republicans signed to impeach Governor DeWine for taking, stay-at-home orders relative to the virus. You've got the governor of Georgia and the Secretary of State of Georgia being vilified because they certified a result that was recounted twice, once by hand and once by machines. That's the environment that we have to defeat. And, we need a coalition of the sensible here to get as, vehement and as active as those who would divide us.
Here's another question for you. This is it, and you'll appreciate this one. The Biden administration looks like a large group of very talented professionals. However, many feel that this is a move back to the status quo.
Yeah.
The status quo is what created the conditions for the rise of the populist candidates. How do you think Biden can mitigate that threat?
It's a really good question. I really, I know a lot of the people he's appointing. I have enormous respect for them. It is, but there's no doubt that they come out of many of them come out of the kind of professional policy world. And, one of the things we're fighting here, and I think to the detriment of the country, but part of this populist rebellion is against the so-called experts, the people who talk about how trade will profit us all, and they don't see that effect in their own community, and on a variety of issues, there is great suspicion. I think the way you defeat that is with policy that actually addresses the concerns of people where they live. More than anything, what we need is to deliver tangible progress in people's lives that they can feel, and that aren't abstract theoretical concepts, but money in their pocket, opportunities on their table, hope for the future. That is what they need to deliver. And I think if they deliver that, the profiles of the people who are delivering it are going to become less important than the results they're producing.
Absolutely. Here's a question that's very specific to Schreiber too. And that's, what did we learn from the war on poverty in the 60s that can help us figure out how to move forward?
Yeah, and I don't know, I don't know how my answer will sit with everybody, but the goal is to allow people, helping people survive should be the floor, not the ceiling.
Right.
The goal is to empower people to live the fullest life that their talents and their drive will allow, and to break down the barriers to that, racial barriers, economic barriers. We ought to look we know what the goal is. We know the goal is we have to set that floor, but how do we set the floor so that it doesn't also become a ceiling? How do we set the floor so that we're giving people the tools and the opportunities, and not just the means of surviving at some minimal level? And I think people in the progressive community need to constantly ask themselves about the programs that have been created and where have they achieved that goal of not just setting a floor, but raising the ceiling, and where have they not? And are there other approaches that might be more successful? Let's be wedded to goals and not means, and constantly be entrepreneurial about looking for new and better ways to raise that ceiling and give people unlimited prospects.
Right. Now, here's a question for you that this came up a lot, obviously, at my work with illegal women voters. And it has been front and center when we waited so many days, weeks, for the results of the election to be finalized. What are your views on the utility of the Electoral College? Because every so often this argument gets resurrected. The conventional argument, here's the question, in favor is it keeps small states from being ignored, but that doesn't seem to be true. And it seems to devalue the votes in states like Illinois and California. There is a movement to sidestep the Electoral College using an interstate compact. So talk a little bit about kind of what you've been hearing, especially about the Electoral College, as we're, you know, like I said, every so often this conversation is resurrected.
Yeah. Look, yeah, we're all electoral college educated now because of what we've seen. I just mentioned, Joe Biden will win this election by 7 million votes, but it will actually have been decided by 42,000 in 3 states that if they had gone the other way, he could have won by 7 million votes and still lost the presidency. And I think that puts tension on our democracy. If you keep electing presidents who have fewer supporters in the country than the person they defeated, there are impacts for it, and we've seen tangible impacts. Donald Trump lost the last election by 3 million votes. He won by a margin a little larger than Biden, but still very slim, of 70,000 in 3 states: Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. If he had lost those, he wouldn't have been president. And with the authority that he had, that he was handed by the Electoral College, but not the popular vote, he will have replaced 3 Supreme Court justices who will make an enormous impact on America for a generation. That is tension on our democratic system. They will have been confirmed by a Senate that represents less than a majority of the country, because we assign senators to each state. And so you can have a majority in the Senate, but that doesn't necessarily represent a majority of the country. All of this, it was designed to protect these small states from being overwhelmed, these agrarian states from being overwhelmed. I disagree that it hasn't worked that way. They actually, I say sometimes that we have a tyranny of the minority in this country. But having said that, the Constitution also makes it very, very difficult to change. I know about the compact. I'm not sure that it will ever get to sufficient weight to work. And I know there are legal concerns about it. And so this is what informs my fundamental thesis. I'm not sure we're going to change this anytime soon. We're not going to change the way we elect senators, and so Democrats better figure out a way to make some inroads into some of these swing states, and with some of these voters who have drifted away, who may be naturally aligned on some issues, or we're going to be in this sort of twilight state for a while, maybe for a long while, where you can scratch out the presidency, but you may not have the Congress at all. And in any case, it's going to be very closely divided. And that also puts a tension on a democracy, because if you can't make progress, then people, we have a situation where change is coming at us very rapidly now, driven by technology and migrations and all of this. And people are anxious, and they want government to respond to some of these changes in ways that give them more of a sense of security. And government is gridlocked. And all of that is concerning. I think the only practical answer is to make a real effort to try and expand your appeal, expand your base.
Absolutely. So we are winding down on time. So I want to give you one last question from the stack of, again, really great questions that are being asked by our participants. This is actually a very specific to the state of Illinois and a recent defeat that we experienced with respect to the fair tax.
Yes.
Which would have raised taxes on the most wealthy and reduced taxes for all others. So the question is, tell us how the advocacy communications must change around this issue of the fair tax and just fairness in general.
Yeah. I was sad to see that. I supported the fair tax and voted for it. It is, to me, a source of shame that in a state like Illinois, that we should be grappling with small rural states, for the title of least generous when it comes to social programs, when, to supporting education. Some of the consequences on education is that we also have very high property taxes. And, one of the things that I wondered about was why there wasn't more of an attempt to link reduction of property taxes to the fair tax. But I do, there's just a great deal of cynicism about any kind of tax changes. It's much easier to make the case that to people, they're more inclined to believe they're going to be hurt by it than helped by it. And so the question is, how do you make a tangible case that this is why this is going to help you? And I have to say, I haven't steeped myself in the data of or reviewed the advertising messages and so on, but clearly just saying we're going to make billionaires and millionaires pay their fair share is not enough. And in a very cynical environment, it's very easy to knock people off of that message, and they got knocked off of that message. And but I am grieving for our state because the system we have is inadequate, and we've got major problems that we need to solve. We got major demands, budgetary demands, and including the pensions. And the people who lose out always in these discussions are the poor. And the only reason they don't lose out more is because there are places like the Shriver Center for Poverty Law who are willing to use all the tools, including the courts, to protect them. But I'd love to see a state where you guys didn't have to be the last resort to keep people from absolute devastation. That we need a more progressive vision.
Absolutely. I know I said that was my last question from the stack, but there is one more that I think is important for you to answer. What are your thoughts about the likelihood of Senate confirmation of any or all of the new cabinet nominees?
Yeah, look, I think most of them will be confirmed. We don't know who all of them are yet, and I expect they'll be disgorging them pretty soon. Neera Tanden at the OMB has been the one who has drawn the most fire. Neera's a friend. She's brilliant, tenacious, also very feisty, as anyone who reads her Twitter feed knows. And that, as you spent years in Washington and around Washington. That is fodder. And many of those tweets were aimed at the Senate Republican majority that now holds her fate in their hands. So, that one's going to be an issue. I think most of them will be confirmed. The Republicans are going to pick their fights strategically, and I think the big ones and the most meaningful ones are going to be about resources, and those are fights that that concern me and that I think we have to win.
Absolutely. My apologies for all the folks who've been putting more questions into our question and answer, because there are some really great ones here, but I wanted to at least make sure I was able to get some of the more pointed ones to the top. But David, I want to thank you again for being willing to have this conversation with us. This is so important right now. And like I said, we're not only grateful for you being here and sharing your insight. I think as advocates, as just concerned citizens, we really appreciate your words and your encouragement, because we have a long road. And so it's important to be realistic about this, but also be optimistic. And I think that you've been able to strike that balance.
Well, I'm honored to be here, Audra. And the Schreiber Center, as I said, without it, there would be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people whose lives would be in desperate straits. And so I admire you guys, and particularly pleased that you're here. And John Bowman, your predecessor, is a dear and close friend of mine, a complete hero in the battle against poverty in Illinois and nationally. But you are a worthy successor, and the outlook and the skills that you bring are going to make a big difference. So, I'm thrilled to be here.
Oh, well, I'm humbled. Thank you so much. I'm actually going to turn this back over to Kenya to lead us to the end of this discussion. Kenya?
Thank you both. Such a great conversation, and David, Audra, I really appreciate, really kind of blasting through many of those questions, and we have more that we captured, and we're planning to save those, and hopefully we'll get a chance to answer some of those after this event. I just would like to thank everyone for being on this webinar, but also being supporters and ambassadors of the Schreiber Center. Many of you may know that David is a longtime friend of the Schreiber Center, but also he is a longtime supporter of the organization as well. And so, David, we just appreciate you supporting the work. And as we are in this last month of working hard to continue our work without interruption, I just wanted you to share very briefly why you support the Schreiber Center.
Yeah, Kenya, thanks for asking. One thing we didn't talk about, and I apologize for my overlong answers, I probably cheated some folks out of their questions, is the whole issue of social justice, George Floyd. We all remember the events of the summer. Many of us were on the street marching, and it felt good to be a part of that. My message is that marching isn't enough. My message is that it's through investments in places like Schreiber where we make our commitments real. Schreiber has is a absolute on the absolute vanguard of fighting for racial equity and justice, and protecting people against discriminatory practices, and protecting people against the sort of inhuman deprivation. And so let's not just march, okay? Let's do things. Let's invest in missions and efforts that can actually make a difference in terms of attacking systemic racism and ending poverty. And really, nationally, when you think about it, Schreiber is right at the forefront of all of that, has been for years and years and years. That's why I'm so pleased to be associated with it. So I'm just asking everybody who hasn't made a donation, hasn't contributed, to do it. And let's make real the commitments that we've made to each other to make this a fairer and more just country.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, David. We really appreciate your support and your continued support for many years. To each and every one of you, thank you again for attending. As mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, we are recording, and a recording will be provided to you via email. We'll also share with you other resources to stay connected. Audra recently released a blog post on her reflections of the 2020 election. So we'll provide a link for you, in addition to our Illinois agenda, the policies that we will be advocating for next month in Illinois. So please check that out. Also, we have an upcoming webinar through our spotlight on the foster care system, and that I believe is on December 9th. We'll send a link to you as well. And just in general, stay in touch with us on social media. We appreciate each of you sharing our posts, staying connected, and really helping us to change the narrative about how people view and understand people experiencing poverty. So again, thank you all for joining us, for supporting us, and for believing in the power of the law. And to you, Audra and David, thank you so much for letting us listen in on your conversation this afternoon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, David.